in 2000 with Joel, after previously working with him at Juno Online Services. If you go back to 2000, you roll back the clock, like New York was not a really big tech scene. So I think like there was a lot of people, or there was a few people that knew each other in that era that were in New York. And also that was also right around the time that people started blogging. Like Dave Weiner was sort of invented that, and like people, Anil was at Six Apart, which was making TypePad and movable type at the time. And so Joel had started writing a blog himself, and also was kind of amassing an audience of readers as we started the company, and sort of wrote about the company. And that's sort of how we connected. And today we're actually, Joel, myself, and Anil are all on the board at Stack Exchange. So that's our current connection too. But Anil's the CEO over at Fog Creek, and Joel's the CEO at Stack. And Trello was a product that Fog Creek had created, and then we spun off as a separate company. So all of those things are sort of tied together in their history.
Great. Yeah, sure. I have two more that I can ask here. With the people that work at Trello, I'm assuming you guys work hard to sort of make sure they feel strong ownership. And, from what I've heard from you and folks that you've worked with closely in the past, you like to experiment often. How do you keep track of the health of your, engine of people, your operations, that most priceless resource of employees, with what seems like a really highly autonomous group? And specifically, sort of how do you tackle knowing and understanding and course correcting what their plans, progress, and problems are?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's changed over time. Like when you're a very small team of people, a lot of that gets informally held in your heads. So as you're working together, it's not like you need to set out strategic goals. Most pretty tactical, like what should we build? How should it work? And then as you get bigger, that the owning that sort of story and what you're doing and how you're going to get there becomes a little bit more formal. At the point now where a lot of that's driven by OKRs, just sort of like a yearly planning cycle where we set OKRs and we're trying to figure out where our focus is going to lie in over the next year. And then that rolls up to an overall strategy at Atlassian. Now that we've been there for a year, where they have a sort of hierarchy of a vision for the year, and then the themes that we're working on, and then the focus areas within those themes, and then the metrics that line up. So we call it the VTFM. So it's vision, themes, right? Am I right, Kelsey? Vision, themes, focus, metrics. Excuse me. And then underneath that, we're sort of like collectively running as a product team, and using our OKRs to drive our goals. But if you roll back the clock to when we were a team of 5 people building Trello, it was not that. It was just sort of like, hey, let's build something cool and see if it works. So it sort of shifted over time.
Got it. Great, thanks. My last question is sort of related, and maybe I'll talk about some of the having to track people to certain priorities and strategic goals as part of this, but in a more broad-based way, as you've grown as a founder and a CEO and even a board member, what would you say is the hardest part of managing growth in a startup?
Oh, that's another good question. I think like part of what you're trying to do when you create a startup is to build something awesome, right? And you kind of expect that if you achieve that goal, you'll be able to reach more people, the number of people working for your company will grow, and there's sort of like this inherent idea of growth built into a startup, not just by the number of people that are using your product, but also internally. But it's also interesting because I think like the way that we work as humans, we're sort of it's hard to experience change, right? Like people are tend to some people tend to be kind of change averse, and I think like the camaraderie and the unity that aligns you is also as you go through these different stages and you sort of look back and you're like, hey, you know, we didn't have to do OKRs before. Why are we doing OKRs now? And it's like going through those different shifts as you sort of like hit 20 people, 50 people, 100 people, and you sort of layer in these processes that you didn't need before. Oh, even hiring like another layer of management, right? Like your engineering team gets big. You used to have one engineering manager for all your engineers, and now you got 50 engineers. That's not going to scale. And now the way that you're communicating is changing. So I think like trying to understand how your processes change. And we went through this even when as we got more and more remote, because when we started out we were all co-located in one spot, and as the company as we started to hire more remote people and the percentage changed over time of how many people were remote, we sort of looked at the way that we were running the business, and we realized some things that worked when we were all in the same place, now we needed some other process to help with that. Like even just getting, how do engineers even meet the sales team? When does that ever happen when you're working remotely and the engineer lives in Hawaii and the salesperson lives in Michigan, and they're just working with the people on their team? How do they ever like interact and meet each other? And it's like, okay, maybe we need to set a time aside where we can get into small groups and random people throughout the company can kind of talk to each other and form empathy and understanding and just meet people that might have happened if we were all in the same physical space, but now that as we have a bigger remote team, that's not happening. So I think it's just sort of growth is awesome, but you also have to like be constantly vigilant to whether the processes that you have in effect now are going to work as you grow.
Yeah, it's great, and especially the remote topic. I've been following that a lot and looking at companies who have executed it well, like Zapier and Trello and a couple others, and looked at the folks who have not as well, and trying to decipher the things that maybe they've done wrong or right has been interesting. And I think a lot of it comes back to making sure those people meet face to face every so often. So
yeah,
great. Thanks very much.
Sure.
Hey, hello. Hey, I'm doing really well. Thanks for asking. Um, yeah, so I had my questions ready, but I just can't seem to find them, and that's why I had my microphone mute. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's funny. Just as a side story, the 5 things thing, I don't know if you've ever heard, but that was originally what we were going to call Trello. The idea for Trello started as this idea that everyone would just have one to-do list, but you can only have 5 things in it. And Joel wanted to call it 5 things. And like the reason was we were trying to create something that was at the right perspective. You know, like you have a lot of tools that are very detail oriented, and it was like sort of how do you constrain yourself to sort of keep the right perspective on things? So it's interesting he asked this question, which I actually spent some time thinking about. One thing is, I think like as you scale up and your team gets bigger, in the beginning, you sort of have everyone's kind of, when you're small, you're kind of peers in a way. But as you get bigger, if you're the CEO, you forget that your voice carries a lot of weight. And so you try to tell people, this is just my opinion. Like, don't weight this any differently. Like, this is what I think about this feature or whatever. There's no way to sort of take off the weightiness of when you say something. So you have to be very careful about when you say things, because you can't just deliver them and have people take them as just another thought from somebody else. That was one thing. The other thing I wish somebody would have told me a long time ago, and I didn't discover this till we started taking investment, was that it's really useful if you have a peer group. Because if you're a CEO, there's actually no peer to you, and that's hard. And so when we took VC, actually that connected me to a lot of other companies in the portfolio, and they did events and stuff where you'd meet other CEOs. And as soon as I started going to these events, I'd talk about some problem I'm having, and somebody would be like, "Oh, I have the same exact problem," and you realize there's a lot of people out there that are in the same situation as you are, and I think it can be a little bit. It may be a little bit lonely. I don't know, as the CEO, but there's not a peer group. So but there's plenty of ways to find peer groups, even if you don't take VC. The third one would be that being CEO is almost never about making decisions. It's almost always about just supporting people and letting them make the decisions, because they're going to be much closer to the problem. Except when you do have to make a decision. And I figured out that the only time that I really have to do that is when there's a lot of good options and people can't make up their minds, and they're just wasting too much time trying to think of the one. And so just picking one actually frees them up to move forward. Most of the job is actually just telling people a bigger story so that they can figure out how to weigh a lot of these options against each other and choose the best one. But actually picking for them is not part of the job. What else did I think? So from my experience as like a developer or programmer, starting a company, hiring engineers was pretty easy. Building out a marketing and support team, we did this at Fog Creek, or marketing and a sales team. We tried to build a sales team at Fog Creek many times, and we always did it wrong. The way that we did it was we hired salespeople. We like dip our toe in the water. We hire a couple salespeople. And that's the total wrong way to build a sales team. If you're going to build a sales team, you should hire a VP of sales. You hire a person who can run a sales team and totally understands it, especially if you're an engineer, because you won't get it. And let them build out the team. And when we did that at Trello, and it worked amazingly well compared to the ways that we had tried to do it previously at Fog Creek. And then the last one was that developer managers are really hard to find, and a lot of people they conflate like being a good developer with being a good developer manager, and they're just totally not anywhere near the same thing. Like the kind of skills that you need for being a manager, any manager, but especially a developer manager, it's just not being a good developer. It's much more about being supportive for people and helping them with their career growth, and basically trying to get everyone's in a good emotional state so that they can be as productive as possible. And it's like it's not about, again, like the CEO position, it's not about like telling people what to do. It's more like making sure that they feel fired up and excited about what you're doing so that they can move a lot quicker than they could if they're spending time worrying about things. So. Sure.
Sorry, I was trying to find the mute button. Yeah, so I'll go next. let me just find where I just put my notes. Sorry, I'm doing this all from my phone. Yeah. So my first question was, I saw that you scaled up to, I think, 25 million users. And my question was, because I heard that you did it without putting money into advertising, putting money into different marketing schemes that people usually do when they have an app. I was wondering what you did specifically that helped you guys to get there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of chicken and egg. When we launched the product, it was 10 years after we had started Fog Creek. So we had a decent amount of people and audience. It was actually a year after we launched Stack Overflow. And we went, the big thing for us was we went to a conference to sort of make a big splash. So when we actually started and launched the product, we went to TechCrunch Disrupt and competed in their startup battlefield. We lost, came in second, but the company that came in first doesn't exist anymore. So I feel like we won. So that was sort of like one thing that we did. And the fact that we didn't spend advertising is both a good thing and a bad thing. I think like it's great because it shows that like there's a lot of organic, people are recommending Trello because they love it and it's a useful product. So sort of like if you build something people love, then they'll obviously tell other people about it and they'll use it, especially a collaboration tool like that, where if one person's using it, you can invite other people and they can sort of get onboarded really easily. You can spread. And the nice thing about Trello is it's really aimed at a horizontal market. So if you're a salesperson using it as a company and then somebody for your marketing team, you end up collaborating with them, the marketing team can go use it. Or if you're a real estate broker and you start using it for some of your clients to find a house and they sort of discover Trello, they can then go use it. Maybe one of the people, maybe the one of the spouses is a banker and they take it back to their company. So it sort of spreads because it can jump through these different, all these different use cases. But I do think that, not advertising, I think the product is pretty awesome. I guess sort of like jaded, or not jaded, but it's sort of like biased, I guess, a little bit. And I think like if more people found out about it, we might be able to grow faster. I just think that when you're a startup, it's hard to figure out how much money to spend on advertising, and it's more difficult to acquire people through that mechanism. But some people, that's the only way they can do it.
Yeah. So I mean, I think just for fluidity purposes of where you just went with that, where would you say that people should focus on placing their dollars if they're a startup and it's all about priorities of where you put what, where do you say priorities should be when you're trying to build?
Yeah, I mean, for all like it used if you roll back the clock like 15 years, a lot of the ways of running a software business were you had to sort of invent everything yourself. The frameworks that you would be building upon weren't that advanced. Even if you wanted to take credit cards, you like literally had to go to the bank and set up a merchant account and create some kind of vault for your credit cards and all this kind of stuff. You fast forward to today, and a lot of that stuff is being provided as a service. There's tons of SaaS services to do a lot of things. And so the nice thing is that you can outsource a bunch of that stuff. So you can outsource your payroll. You can sign up for JustWorks or PEO or something like that. You can outsource your payment processing to Stripe or Braintree. You can outsource your accounting to Bench. And the nice thing about that is like you can just focus on making a really amazing product because that's what's going to make the difference. The tricky part is that it's gotten a lot easier to build software. And so because of all of that, because you can outsource that and because the technologies that we build upon have gotten easier to use. So the question is now, how do you set yourself apart? Because just building features is not going to do it, right? Like somebody in their house, like if you think about Stack Overflow, which is a question and answer site for developers, like it's not really the software that makes it so valuable. That's a piece of the puzzle, but really what it is the network. It's the behavior of all the people going there to ask the questions and get the answers. And I think what you have to ask yourself today is, you know, the technology that you build your idea on is important, but it's also the experience of how people are connecting with it. So I think like the challenge for software people today is how do you provide a more human experience when you're using your software? People's expectations are higher now. You know, they want a tool that can work for them, not just at work, but also at home. They wanted to go all they got their phone with them all the time now. So how do you, you know, go throughout those different roles they have in life? How do you create a product that people love?
Absolutely, yeah. No, I hear you. That makes a lot of sense. So my next question would be in terms of that context as well, as far as like there's this relationship with users and their product. As someone entering the app space where it's so convoluted with all these different apps, there's millions of them. How do you think? What do you think founders should necessarily do to differentiate to break through the noise?
Well, it's just an expansion of the idea that I was just saying, which is that the humanity of your software is kind of really important. And what I mean by that is, like, obviously the design is important. I also think the connection that people feel to your software is important. Like if you think about Trello, if you go in there and you make a board, you can set the board background. When you add a picture to a card, you see the image on the card. Now those things are like, they seem tangential to the experience, but they're actually very important to the experience. You look at another example like Medium. You know, Medium made it so that when you write, like there's content, CMSs have existed for a long time. Blogger has been around, Typepad. Why did Medium have success? WordPress was out there. They did something where they sort of like, they made it so that even if you had, like the default experience was actually a pretty good design, and they made a hero image at the top of the screen. So you put like a graphic up there. So when you come to that page, they wasted like a third of the page on an image. But the thing that I felt was one thing that made it work was that it became, there was sort of an emotional connection that you would have. Like you'd get there and the sort of design and experience of what you were reading was, the default experience was pretty high. You didn't have to force somebody to come up with that design. The design was pretty good in itself. So that's part of it. I think the personalization of software is part of it. So sort of when you end up on those Trello boards and the background is set to your background and the images are your images, when you see that, it sort of feels like your place. You see that with emoji reactions too. Why are emoji reactions so popular? Because people can put custom ones in there and they can start, using inside jokes to, the group of people that they're interacting with. And that becomes really important because these tools now are kind of a location for people. They're basically a new office for people. So if everyone's using these tools to do work, if you're using your chat tools and your productivity tools and your collaboration tools to do work, that space becomes the place where you're communicating with your coworkers, the place where you're collaborating with your coworkers. It becomes your new office. And so the things that might, personalize an actual physical office space, those kinds of same things are happening in software too.
All right. Well, all right. And then lastly is, I'm sure even though you weren't necessarily putting dollars into advertising, like it says, there are certain things along the way that help build your audience. Were there times where you felt a plateau in your user base, or a plateau in like just where you guys were going, and you had to find a way to kind of break that plateau?
No, I mean, I don't think we've felt necessarily a plateau. I do think it's interesting because there's some seasonality effect to the way that we see Trello and the Trello adoption. And I think there's a cool effect that happens around when people go back to school. You see a lot of acceleration and growth. And I also think you see that in January when people come back to work. And that ties, together with like people trying to get organized, right? Those are like two big moments of the year when people are like, I really got to get my shit together. And you can see that historically, when we look at our growth rates, that those are inflection points throughout the year. So not necessarily plateau, but it's an interesting effect that it sort of like works
Yeah.
on that cyclical cycle. So
And there's nothing you guys like. I mean, I guess that's a bit out of your hands, but is there anything that you guys did to try to encourage the?
I've seen we didn't actually do this, but one thing that happened was it was like 2 years ago. Lifehacker wrote like I don't know, must have been like 5-page article on how to use Trello to run your life, and they published it in January. So it was already a time when people were like, you know, really back into organization. And one of the people at Lifehacker wrote this like really in-depth guide to how to use Trello. And I think that was just those two things together were a huge moment for our growth story.
All right, and Yitzi, do I have any room for one last question, or? Yeah, just in the investor company relationship is this sort of question. What did you guys do, or if there was anything, in terms of getting that 10 million that you guys fundraised? You know, I'm sure you've met probably with multiple VCs and
it's
things, so.
to be honest, it's not a typical story because when I was, I don't know if you heard when I was telling Brian about sort of Fog Creek and the company that we started, and then, you know, we built a lot of products over the years. So we started in 2000, built a lot of things. Many of them failed, but we learned a lot of lessons. About 10 years later, one of the things we built was Stack Overflow, which sort of took off, and it was a Q&A site for developers. And we actually had built it and sort of bootstrapped it ourselves, and it sort of had a lot of momentum. And we had VCs contact us. And so that was kind of like, okay, we kind of thought about it and thought it was the right time to sort of drive growth into the company. And so did that. And it was a year later that we started working on Trello. And we bootstrapped Trello ourselves for probably about 3 years, and took you know, the funds that we were making at Fog Creek from selling our other software and invested it into Trello. So by the time we got to the point where we wanted to take VC, we already knew venture capitalists. We had worked with a bunch of people at Stack Overflow, and we also had just done 3 years of, you know, growing and investing into it ourselves. So basically, we kind of did our own seed round. And so it wasn't a typical, I don't think it was a typical experience. This was not we hit Sand Hill Road and did like 15 different presentations. This was more like we went to the VCs that we already knew and said, hey, you know, we're growing at this speed, but we really want to do 4 different things at once. And the only thing holding us back is we could hire, if we hired more developers, and we need more cash to do it. So we think it's the right time to you know, invest in this idea, and we could spin it off. Here's the growth numbers. And they were kind of like, sign me up. We were kind of like, okay. So it's like, it's sort of not instructive to like other people. I think it's, you know, we just got really lucky, to be honest.
Wow, it's really cool. Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah. So most of my questions were answered as you were talking to other people, so it was really cool. So basically, I just came down to one question, and it's more about leadership.
Okay.
And the question is, like, who's someone who had an impact on you as a leader, and like starting off early in the career that grew to be something that you use like every day, or you think about, or is like a core value in your leadership as a CEO of Trello?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, in my case, I connected with my co-founder, Joel Spolsky, back in the day through just a fluke. Like, I happened to be working at an internet startup in New York City at the same time that he did. And he had been a program manager on Excel, on the Excel team at Microsoft. And so had a bunch of experience in the tech industry. I had just come out of school. I didn't know anything. And when I was working at this company, I had to build, I was trying to build something in Visual Basic. And most of the developers there were like Linux devs. So they were like, go ask Joel. He's the Microsoft expert. And so I just kept going to him with questions. And I'm, I was a young kid at the time, and he was very generous with his time because he's working on some other thing, and over time, we sort of developed a relationship as friends. And when the time came to start a company, I think I was too naive to really know what I was doing, but he had quit before and was taking time off, and I just quit and said, yeah, I'm in, let's do it. And even though he was, much more senior than me and had a lot more experience, we split the equity in the company 50-50. And, I think like just learning from him and being present for that early stage growth of our company, and riffing on the ideas that we had and the ways that we structured our compensation for people and the kinds of benefits that we wanted to do. And at the time, building a software company in New York was kind of unheard of. I mean, that's part of the reason why we started the company. Nowadays, it's, there's tons of startups are in New York, and all the big companies have offices here and everything. But back in 2000, it was a little bit, it wasn't very common. In fact, I think we were probably one of the only pure software companies in New York at the time. But yeah, Joel had a huge impact on me and has been a big mentor to me in my career.
Wow, thank you for that. I really do like that story. I could relate to it. So yeah, that was it for me, and I'm excited to hear what other people have to say.
Thank you.
I don't know. There's some good stories that Trello has just from early days that I love, but I'm not really sure like if they're super helpful for what you guys are thinking. And I know we have kind of a huge breadth of different people here.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I was thinking that it might be good to just add to the conversation as well is, I'm not sure if this group is familiar with the story around the acquisition by Atlassian, so that could be something to go into quickly if you guys are interested.
Yeah, so I as I said, I started Fog Creek. One of the products that we made was actually not the one that we thought was going to be a big hit. We actually made a content management system first. It was called CityDesk, and tried to sell that. And on the side, we had a bug tracking app that we named Fog Bugs. Not the best name, but it was Fog Creek Software, and it was a bug tracking app, so we named it Fog Bugs. We weren't the best at naming things, which actually there's a whole other naming story on Trello I could tell. But so the content management system product that we built and had put all our energy into was not taking off. Actually, Movable Type and 6 Apart were doing pretty well at the time, but this other product that we made, a bug tracking app called Fogbugs, was doing pretty well. And so we sort of built that out, and these two guys in Australia were competing with us. It was Mike and Scott. They had built this product called Jira, and you sort of like fast forward the clock, and Jira's sort of taking off and doing really well, and we're doing some other stuff. We're doing Stack Overflow and built Trello. Try to target it. It was actually one of the things that we did with Trello was we were intentionally trying to build a product that was not for developers, which was new for us because everyone that we knew were developers. All the stuff we had built historically was for technical people, but the audience that we really wanted to use Trello was not technical. Like, I mean, sure, if technical people use it, that's great, but like we were trying to really build something that was very horizontal, that could reach across all kinds of use cases. So that was new for us. And, we had some success. And so I knew Mike and Scott sort of professionally. I didn't know them very well because we were kind of competitors, so I didn't spend a lot of time creating a relationship with them. But when Mike reached out to me, he said, "Hey, you want to talk about Trello? I'm going to be in town." He sent me an email, and I was like, "Sure, this was at a moment where everything's going pretty well for Trello. So I'm like, I'd love to talk. I kind of suspected that maybe he was thinking of an acquisition. So I said, sure, I'll go and hear him out. And we had lunch, and I don't know what I was expecting to happen at lunch. I probably thought he'd show up and like pass a number across the table, and I'd look at it, and I don't know. I'd never been through this before. But anyway, we spent the next hour and a half like talking about this sort of vision for Trello, all the things it could do, the people and the culture behind the company that we had built. And we're just, it was just there were a lot of similarities between the ways that we thought about things. It was a lot of things where there's this one story, this is just a silly thing, but it was like kind of indicative of the whole conversation. It was like, I'm talking, I'm saying, when we built Trello, we wanted it to be used throughout the whole world. Like we wanted to get 100 million people to use it. Like we picked that number because it was like of a size that was so crazy that we thought that would signal the kind of market that we wanted to do. And he sort of chuckled at that time. And I thought, like, what is he laughing because he thinks this is ridiculous? But he tells me, he says, we had a internal goal for Atlassian, like we wanted to get to 60,000 customers, and we passed it. And so we did a lot of, internal soul searching. We're kind of like, what's our new big, hairy, audacious goal? Like, what are we going to, over the next decade, what are we going to sort of strive for? And what we came up with is we want to get 100 million people using our products. And I was kind of like, oh, that's interesting. I mean, so there was like little things like that, just in the way the vision for the product and the kinds of, we both had built companies in the same era. And so even though we had sort of gone on these different trajectories, they're very similar in a lot of ways. And the kinds of company that we had built were very similar in a lot of ways. And so time, it was like an hour and a half later, and I had to go back to a meeting, and Mike had to go. And I think he had flown out there just to have this lunch with me all the way from Sydney. I didn't realize at the time. I probably would have stayed a little bit longer if I had known that. But I went back to the office, and I was like, that was a great conversation. I don't really know. I think he was trying to acquire a company. I'm not really sure. It was like, and what I realized later was, they had done 18 acquisitions before this. Like most of them were not the same size and scope as Trello, but they had done this a lot. And one of the things that I really respect about the way that they run their company is when they do something, they look backwards, they do a retrospective, and they try to learn from it. They say, like, what went well, what didn't go well. And I could tell throughout the process of this acquisition that a lot of the thought and care that they were putting into how we were taking the steps forward was very intentional. So one, make sure there's alignment of the people for the vision and the culture. Like, don't worry about, yes, there's a financial thing that you have to sort out, but it's almost secondary, right? Like the primary concern is, this is going to be fun for people. Are they excited about this? Is this good? Is this a good story? Is this where we want to take our company, our business? And I think like you get at a company that's still run by the founders, like that's something special, at a company the size of Atlassian. So that's sort of the beginnings of the story, and then there was a lot of work on you have to actually do all the stuff and make the little document. But it actually made coming into the company and being part of the company and sort of like, you have to go, one of the things about an acquisition, the other side of this we went through before, which was Trello was part of Fog Creek. And when we spun it out and took VC funding, we took a group of people that was part of a bigger whole and sort of spun it out. And that's emotionally a challenge for people because it's sort of like an identity change, right? Like you went from one thing to now you're two things. And so, you see that process is the same thing when you go into a company as well, right? So, and I think like we spent a lot of time thinking about that and trying to get ahead of any turbulence that we might have and thinking about how people's emotional roller coaster would go as we did this acquisition, because that was really primary concern. Like part of this is really keeping Trello moving at the speed that it's moving and making sure that what Atlassian is doing is providing top spin to that, right? Like in no way do they want to slow us down. So we have to figure out like how do they actually help us move faster. And that we've done a bunch of things that were on our list of things we've always wanted to do. As soon as we got in the door, we were able to push out a desktop application, which is something that we wanted to do for a very long time. I was talking before about I wish there were more people that knew about Trello, but we never had the money to spend. And we just did a campaign in Times Square. We were we're thinking about that, how we spend more money on advertising and let people know about Trello. There's just a lot of things that we launched in Japan. That was like a big thing on our to-do list that we always wanted to do, but never had the sort of holistic approach that we could do with Atlassian. They have an office there. There's like 12 people. So for Trello to launch in Japan and be present locally was much easier now that we're part of Atlassian. So that was sort of the story of how it happened and where we are. And if you have any specific questions about that, I'm happy to answer, but I'm really happy with how it turned out. Thank you. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Yeah, and thank you for organizing it. See, it's been great. So yeah, thanks for everyone for participating, and look forward to catching up at the next opportunity.